The following is an excerpt from the Intrusions In Depth podcast, episode 6.1, Salt Typhoon. Based on feedback from the audience, I was asked to break this out into a segment. So enjoy the following.
3. Chinese attackers exfiltrated national security information from the Naval Air Weapons Station in China Lake, which, despite the name, is in Ridgecrest, California. It's where the Navy does testing and research. The information stolen included nuclear weapons tests, design data, and stealth aircraft data. Now, maybe this happened by chance, like the DNS wasn't routed correctly, so they saw the word China and thought it was theirs, but I doubt it. And then, in 2005, attackers infiltrated NASA's networks managed by Lockheed Martin and Boeing and exfiltrated information about the Space Shuttle Discovery program. Then additionally, in 2005, attackers gained access to the U.S. Department of Defense's network in an operation known as Titan Rain. That's a pretty prominent attack and probably warrants a future episode or like a mini episode in the future. But essentially, they targeted U.S. defense contractors, Army Information Systems Engineering Command, and Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA, and the Naval Ocean Systems Center, and the U.S. Army Space and Strategic Defense Installation. And this was one of the first attacks known to be carried out by the PLA Unit 61398. This is also known as APT-1, Comet Crew, and Byzantine Candor. APT-1 is a big deal, at least to me, and I'll definitely save that for a future episode. Now, in the summer of 2006, Chinese attackers got to work again. In July, the U.S. State Department's unclassified network was breached and sensitive information and passwords were stolen. In August of 2006, Chinese attackers got into the Department of Defense's non-classified NIPRNet and downloaded 10 to 20 terabytes of data. And then later in 2006, it was also disclosed that the attackers got into the U.S. Naval Warfare College. Then shortly after that, in 2007, the Pentagon announced that the Joint Strike Fighter project had been compromised and the attackers stole data related to the F-35 fighter jet. And while we're talking about 2007, in general, that was a very busy year. I think it was a combination of better detection methods and maturity of skills by the attackers and the defenders. So it's very likely that some early attacks weren't discovered at all, which is alarming, you could say. So in January 2007, the National Defense University discovered Chinese malware in its computer systems. In June of 2007, PLA attackers breached a Pentagon computer network serving the Secretary of Defense, and it forced the network to be shut down for more than a week. Following that, in September of 2007, the attackers gained access to the Department of Homeland Security's networks through a contractor and exfiltrated unclassified information to Chinese servers. Then, the big one, in December of 2007, when Chinese attackers successfully stole information from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and the National Nuclear Security Administration. Later on, in 2008, Chinese attackers infiltrated the networks of President Barack Obama and John McCain's presidential campaigns and exfiltrated information about future policy agendas. And just to reiterate that again, that is 2008. They also infiltrated the computer networks of the White House and obtained emails between senior government officials. This was most likely to help with negotiations and discussions between the world leaders. Not to leave the private sector out, though, in March of 2009, Chinese attackers got into Coca-Cola's network and stole trade secrets information, including information related to the attempted $2.4 billion acquisition of Hainan Juice Company. Also, randomly, in March of 2009, Chinese attackers stole information from the office of Senator Bill Nelson in Florida. This was also around the time in which the Dalai Lama's computer networks were compromised. Also, I wouldn't even have thought that the Dalai Lama had computers, to be honest, but I guess they need something to edit those YouTube videos on. Now we get into some of the more significant accounts. In January 2010, Google announced that a sophisticated attack had penetrated its networks. More than 30 other companies were attacked as well. The goal, which Google attributed to China, was to collect technology to gain access to Gmail accounts belonging to activists and to Google's Gia password management system. This was a big deal as Google is a big company and prominent in the United States, and significant that the Chinese didn't really care about using their military on American businesses. There was also other attacks on companies including Adobe, Rackspace, Yahoo, and Northrop Grumman. Now, the motives, they appear to be espionage, but also they place malicious code in the wide open source code repositories of those companies, some of them at least, which in reverse would just be weird. Like if we turn the US military loose on TikTok or Alibaba. Now, this was dubbed Operation Aurora by Dmitry Alperovich, the then vice president of McAfee. The Aurora name comes from a file path discovered in the forensic artifacts of the attacker's computer. McAfee's CTO at the time, George Kurtz, was also heavily involved in the disclosure and the analysis of this attack. Those names may sound familiar as they went on to form CrowdStrike. Also, in 2010, NATO and the EU issued a warning that a number of cyber attacks against their networks had increased, with Russia and China being among the most active adversaries. Some things never change. In other words, those intrusions weren't entirely focused on just American companies. In March 2011, attackers breached RSA security and compromised the RSA Secure ID tokens. The stolen information was used in subsequent attacks carried out by China. These are like early MFA tokens that people would be given to log into sensitive programs. If you've ever worked in government, you've probably seen them on keychains or lanyards. Now, April 2011, a phishing campaign aimed at compromising hundreds of Gmail passwords and accounts for prominent people, including senior U.S. officials, took place. They also attempted to steal technical data from the computer systems of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Again. In February 2012, attackers once again stole classified information about the technologies on board the F-35 Joint Strike Fighters. Then, in March of 2012, NASA reported that Chinese attackers conducted 13 attacks against NASA computers in 2011. In one attack, the intruders stole 150 user credentials that could be used to gain unauthorized access to NASA's systems. An attack at the Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, allowed intruders to gain full access to key JPL systems and sensitive user accounts. Now, around this time, China announced a strategic focus in their own military and space systems. Now, March of 2012, Trend Micro released information about Lucky Cat, a campaign that went after US-based activists and organizations and some Tibetan activists. June of 2012, DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, reported that between 2011 and 2012, Chinese attackers targeted 23 gas pipeline companies and stole information that could be used for sabotage purposes. Also around the same time, PLA Unit 61398, APT-1, attacked Digital Bond, a SCADA ICS security company, with a spear phishing attack. So now we have pivoted into critical infrastructure back in 2011 and 2012. And of course, Unit 61398 pops up again and again and again. And well, since we're here, speaking of Unit 61398, in February of 2013, Mandiant released their APT-1 report. This revealed that the PLA unit had attacked U.S. victims since 2006, including organizations in the IT, aerospace, and telecommunication sectors, among others. And like I said earlier, this was a really big deal, as it put Mandiant on the map and kind of highlighted and raised the bar of what an APT threat report looks like. Then, in March of 2013, President Xi Jinping assumed control of the country and things took off. In 2013, a Defense Science Board report found that PLA attackers had stolen U.S. weapon system designs, including those for the PAC-3 THAAD, the Aegis, the F-18 fighter jet, the V-22 Osprey, the Black Hawk helicopter, and the Littoral combat ship. They also got into the Army Engineering's core inventory of dams and U.S. Transportation Command's networks. Then, throughout 2013, the attackers went after national defense contractors and large American oil and gas companies. Are we noticing a trend here? They also went after think tanks, probably in an effort to understand U.S. foreign policy on China or leverage this information in negotiations again. In response, in May of 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Chinese nationals and identified them as being members of the PLA Army Unit 61398. They alleged that the attackers targeted 6 American companies in the power, metals, and solar production industries and stole trade secrets and information. The reality is that there were likely more attacks, but these were the only ones that the DOJ had evidence in which that they could prove and felt comfortable releasing. No one thought that China would extradite these individuals back to the United States to face charges. But what can we gather based off this victimology? Maybe China saw the upcoming pivot to green energy and wanted to capture the market. Subsidize a strategic industry to get a monopoly, then, like we said, raise the prices to get the profits. Now, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, you would say that they also funded groups and social media campaigns to push America towards green energy, or maybe parts of Europe. I mean, maybe that's getting a little conspiratorial. In August of 2014, the United States Investigation Services, with the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, had also been infiltrated, and the personal information of federal employees, including security clearance information, had been stolen. This was one of the first instances of part of the larger 2015 OPM hack. In January of 2015, Anthem, a health insurance company, was also compromised, and attackers stole data concerning approximately 7.8 million people from Anthem's computer networks. 2015 also had a ton of insider threats in various industries, with Chinese nationals straight up walking out the door or emailing private information to government handlers. Windmill designs, pharmaceuticals, all kinds of stuff. In 2015, things also got to the point where President Obama had bluntly issued a warning to Chinese President Xi Jinping, by name, that these attacks had to stop or the United States would be forced to take actions, possibly in the form of sanctions if they didn't. And this is important in my opinion. This was a clear line from the US government that Beijing was going too far. This signaled a pain point. Then, almost instantly, things got quieter, deep into 2016. US Steel did accuse China of stealing proprietary information about steel production techniques for the benefit of Chinese steel producers. It's unclear whether this was an old attack discovered at the time or a fresh one, but for our purposes, I don't think it really matters. It's corporate espionage for the benefit of China. Same MO as before. But the point I'm attempting to make is that Chinese attackers slowed down significantly. Then the 2016 election happened. President Obama had reached his term limits, and Donald Trump had defeated Hillary Clinton to become the 45th president of the United States. There was also widely publicized accusations that Russia had influenced the results of the election. And honestly, I think a lot of people and important organizations turned their attention to Russia as a result. And when China wasn't the focus anymore, they quietly ramped up those attacks again. CrowdStrike released their report on Mustang Panda in 2017 about Chinese attackers targeting US think tanks. In 2017, the CC Cleaner attack happened, where CC Cleaner was compromised and over 1 million users got the first stage of an attack. And then just 40 PCs received the second payload, which was a much more targeted stage of the attack. Now, among the victims in the second stage were Akamai, D-Link, Google, HTC, Linksys, Microsoft, Samsung, Sony, VMware, and Cisco. Although the success of that second stage across those various orgs doesn't appear to be high, at least there's not a lot of reporting on it. Nonetheless, though, this represents a more targeted, disciplined victimology, in my opinion. In the past, having access to millions of machines would have been too juicy to just pass up. However, now they realize that being loud would likely get them caught faster. In 2018, a US Navy contractor was breached. The attacker stole 614 gigabytes of information. This includes data on supersonic anti-ship missiles for the US submarines. They also took submarine radio room information related to the crypto systems used for sensitive communications. Additionally, they stole Navy Submarine Development Unit electronic warfare library, and that contains details about the technology used in fighting, obviously. And all of this is confidential information. And as a note for my younger listeners, crypto as in cryptological algorithms for these systems. The Navy wasn't mining Bitcoin or some other fake money coins.
But it's my Top Gun meme coin, bruh.
Now, electronic warfare, or EW, is the use of electronic systems to detect, analyze, or counter enemy radar and communication signals. It's usually broken down into like EA, electronic attack, EP, electronic protection, and ES, electronic warfare support. Now, none of this is really top secret or anything. You can kind of look it up all online, but how it's actually done, the tactics of it is pretty sensitive. But you can see why China would be interested in this material. One, you can repurpose it to use it against the United States or other Chinese adversaries. Two, you know the capabilities and limitations of the American systems. Furthermore, submarines in general are rather secretive. I mean, pictures of their props are forbidden in most cases, and usually covered with shrouds so you can't track them acoustically. Attackers also target U.S. defense and engineering companies with ties to the South China Sea. Now, you could say that the South China Sea is another hotspot for Chinese activities and their loose interpretations of sovereign rights. In addition to Taiwan, China also lays claim to parts of the Philippines, Japan, and the Koreas as well. Now, 2018 also had reports of Chinese spies eavesdropping on calls made by President Trump on an unsecured phone, as well as stolen information from Navy contractors, including ship maintenance data and further missile plans. It was a rough year for the Navy. And to add salt to the wounds, also in 2018, the attackers stole hundreds of gigabytes of data from technology companies and various U.S. government agencies. It stole names, social security numbers, date of birth, salary information, phone numbers, and email addresses of more than 100,000 U.S. Navy personnel. And in an effort to overshadow their 2018 conquest, in 2019, Chinese attackers started early. Shortly after Chinese New Year, in March, attackers targeted Israeli defense firms that had connections to the United States military. In April of that year, General Electric's trade secrets concerning jet engine turbine technologies were stolen. Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, had prevented an attack targeting sensitive intellectual property. And then in May, it was discovered that Chinese intelligence services reportedly had been using alleged NSA hacking tools since 2014 or 2016. There's conflicting reports there. But for more than a year before those were publicly leaked. In July, Chinese attackers from the group APT-10 targeted 3 U.S. utility agencies with spear phishing campaigns to gain access to computer networks. Then in August of 2019, APT-41 was reported on, stating that since 2012, they had gathered data from the firms in telecommunications, healthcare, and semiconductor manufacturing, and machine learning. This group was also active in the theft of digital cryptocurrencies, or crypto, as the kids would say. Now, Mandiant has a pretty good report that I'll link through to it. In August, multiple U.S. cancer institutes were targeted to take information related to cutting-edge cancer research. And then staying once again in 2019, in October, reports came out outlining how China stole information from various Western aircraft companies for their C919 airliner. And for context, the C919 airliner is significant as it was China's first homegrown mainline passenger plane. It's a narrow-body airplane manufactured by the Shanghai-based state-owned Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China. It's also more commonly known as COMAC. Now, it was built to rival the popular Airbus A320 and the Boeing 737 platforms. And it's a way to solidify Chinese aviation's industry and establish China as a major manufacturer of passenger aircraft. Then, COVID kicks off. In response, in 2020, U.S. officials reported seeing a surge of attacks against healthcare providers, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They also alleged that the attackers stole information regarding vaccines. 2020 also had a ramp up of indictments and various insider threats being discovered in universities. CISA and the NSA warned about the MSS's efforts in ramping up the scanning of U.S. networks for vulnerable devices. Then, in December of 2020, Axios reported on a Chinese intelligence operation that allegedly occurred between 2011 and 2015, a 4-year period. Now, during this operation, a Chinese spy named Fang Fang targeted local and national politicians through networking, campaign fundraising, and romantic relationships, with the goal to gain proximity to political power and who knows what else. Now, the main congressman connected to this operation was a Democrat representative from California, Eric Swalwell. Swalwell sits on the House Permanent Select Committee of Intelligence. Now, pulling that thread further, this is a sensitive group that deals with the nation's spy stuff, like keeping America safe from other countries, sneaky plans, in theory at least. Now, Swalwell has been on this committee since 2015, and he even led a smaller part of it called the CIA Subcommittee, which focuses on the Central Intelligence Agency's work. Now, this committee has access to top secret information, which is why people got worried about Fang Fang, the suspected Chinese spy, getting close to him. But this isn't a civics class soap opera, so let's kind of stay on task. Getting into March 2021, Microsoft's email was compromised in order to steal data from over 30,000 organizations around the world, including government agencies, legislative bodies, law firms, defense contractors, etc., etc. Now, this was a Microsoft Exchange Server 0 day, which I'm going to go into more detail about, but was attributed to the Ministry of State Security. In October 2021, a Chinese link group gained access to call records and text messages from telecommunications carriers across the globe, according to a report by CrowdStrike. This was originally the Light Basin attacks, but now I think it's been revised to be Liminal Panda. The report outlines the group began its cyber attacks in 2016 and infiltrated at least 13 telecommunications networks, mostly focused in Africa and South Asia. And this kind of highlights one of the benefits of the Defend Forward missions carried out by the United States government in 2018 or so. Usually, these smaller countries are test beds for attackers before they go prime time. The idea is that Russia, China, etc., adversaries to the United States, don't expect US government or Western defenders to be on those networks. Now, this also gives Western defenders a chance to gather intelligence. November of 2021 had more defense contractors being breached. The attackers were observed and, well, I guess, along with everyone else, attempting to leverage Log4j exploits for initial entry. Going into 2022, there was initially arrest in connection to fox hunting, which I think I'll discuss in the next episode of the series. And I think this is a good place to wrap up the history, as most of the prominent stuff falls under the Salt Typhoon umbrella, and I want to explore that more in detail throughout this episode.
And there you have it. If you've enjoyed this, consider listening to the full episode at IntrusionsInDepth.com, episode 6.1, Salt Typhoon. While you're at it, please subscribe and like and do all the other social media things you're supposed to do, and tell your friends to give it a listen. I'm Josh Depp from the Intrusions In Depth podcast. Thanks for listening.